Hi, everybody. I want to welcome people back. If people could sit down, we'll get the next panel on tactical mobility all started. Just some housekeeping reminders. Please visit the expo and check out the latest and greatest in innovation. Also, please don't forget to send in the surveys and tell us what you think. And it would be very appreciated to go and visit the vendors who made it out here and spent their good money and wanted to sort of get in front of everybody. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Andy Banks, who's the Enterprise Relationship Manager for U.S. Navy at Citrix. Andy, take the stage.
Thank you, Randy. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having an informative and productive day, as we are. As Randy mentioned, my name is Andy Banks with Citrix Public Sector. I'm here to introduce our next panel, which is about tactical mobility and cloud. This panel will work towards identifying a secure tactical mobility roadmap, considering the capabilities that the commercial industry can provide, and considering also the complications that the tactical edge places on those commercial solutions. It will also take a look at the policies and technologies needed to enable effective solutions to be developed in light of the Federal Spectrum Auction and the NSA's Commercial Solutions for Classified program. So let's welcome our panelists. First, our moderator will be Donovan Cousins. He's the C2 Systems and Application Analyst at Headquarters, Marine Corps, C4 Strategy and Plans of the United States Marine Corps. J.D. McCrary, Chief of Disruptive Technology Programs at Georgia Tech Research Institute. Jim Robinson, Director of Viasat. Major Kevin Shepard, United States Marine Corps Common Handheld Team Lead, Marine Corps Systems Command of the United States Marine Corps. Rick Walsh, the Mobile Lead at the CIO G6 of the U.S. Army. And Jamie Wu, Senior Manager, Department of Defense Sales at Samsung. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Donovan.
Right behind you.
There you are.
Hey, thanks a lot, Andy. So I'm Donovan Cousins. I work over at Headquarters, Marine Corps C4, the Strategic Planning Division. My job title is deal mainly with C2 services and systems and applications. It sort of has spilled over into tactical mobility lately. And I've been to several of these events, AFCEA events that have focused on mobility. But none of them have really tackled the challenge of tactical mobility. And I realize that tactical is a pretty broad term. Depending who you talk to, it's different things. So we really, in this particular panel, we really like to focus on mobility at the tactical edge. And we're really talking about the guys that are actually pointing the weapons and doing the missions on the ground, and that really have the challenge of being integrated into a tactical comms architecture, with their mobile devices or with whatever tactical mobility devices they're using. So we talk a lot about secure mobility, how we do things securely, and we look to DISA, we look to NSA to really define what secure is, but we've never been able to reach that point of being secure by DISA and NSA's definition. So at the last summit, Terry Halverson and Lieutenant General Bowman, they talked about secure enough mobility, and that's sort of what we want to talk about here. We want to talk about what are the specific challenges that the tactical environment presents. What constraints are added by the missions and the domain itself, the environment. What particular challenges that we've been having through several years of experimentation in this particular realm, and start looking at how we can move forward. Where the potential is, and it's going to touch upon all of previous panels that we've had, IoT, disruptive tech. And application, the application environment. So we've got very experienced, very smart panel, and we're going to get into some hot and heavy details about how we plan to do that. I think so. I hope this is a good value for you guys. I know I was very excited about having this panel, and I hope that in the future we can make this a regular edition. Maybe we can have a full day for tactical mobility at some point. An hour is not enough, but maybe we can give you guys a little taste and get everybody on the same page and working together towards solving this problem for the guys at the tactical edge. So I guess starting with Jamie, just kind of touch upon who you are, what you do, and how you support tactical mobility.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Jamie Wu with Samsung, and I am the DoD account manager. So my job is basically to introduce Samsung products in our IT product portfolio into the Department of Defense, and specifically for this, supporting the tactical warfighter. So as we all are aware, right, smartphones and tablets have made their way onto the battlefield and used more as mobile computing than as a traditional cell phone, right, to send your Twitter pictures, et cetera, but actual communication tools as well as intelligence gathering, et cetera. So being one of the largest OEMs for smartphones and tablets in the world, we've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with our Department of Defense as well as the Korean military to introduce some of our products into that space. And it's been a tremendous learning curve, and I've only been here for about 2 years, but in those 2 years we made tremendous strides, I believe, in supporting the warfighter, and we continue to do so. And it's a learning curve as as technology evolves. It's definitely a learning curve, and we're hopefully having a great partnership with the government to come up with these solutions. So, thank you.
Kevin.
Yes, I'm Major Kevin Shepard, and I'm the MAGTF Common Handheld Team Lead at Marine Corps Systems Command under PM MC3. We have started a program now to field handheld devices to the tactical edge for use in the field, and as Donovan was noting, for tactical use by the guy that's actually holding a rifle, as well as some peripheral uses to go along with that as it goes out. We started this endeavor about a year ago to figure out how to go into this best. We were actually at this venue last year, and there's been a lot of noise in the field and a lot of things going on, and Colonel McDaniels came to me and said, help us figure out how to navigate these waters with everything that's going on and all of the pressure that's on us from higher as well as from the user community to get these things out there. So as an acquisitions guy, of course, I think somebody said it on the last panel, the first thing I did was say, well, it's the requirements guy's problem. And so, you kick that over the fence, but that, it didn't take long for us to realize that that's really not the case, that the requirements are actually there. There's lots of requirements there. And with the evolving what's going on with security right now with the NSA and CSFC and everything else, those requirements brought into that view give a clear picture for how we need to go forward. So we're starting to move forward now, and so that's who I am and what I'm doing and where we're at.
Jim.
Jim Robinson, currently work at Viasat as the Director of Marine Corps Business out in Carlsbad, California. Before I came to Viasat in July of last year, I wrapped up a 20-year career in the Marine Corps where I was an infantry officer and also a communications officer. I was honored to have Donovan ask me to come in and sit on this. A lot of the reason is not just because I work at Viasat, but I had a lot of experience in Iraq and Afghanistan with doing the very stuff that we're talking about doing here. Real short story, back in 2010, 2011, then I fielded the first 117 Golf radios that did ANW2 in Afghanistan. I put 755 out there, 55 of them out there, and was training Marines on how to do a concept called UAS support fires. My kit at the time included a 7800T ISR receiver, handheld ISR receiver. I carried a 152, I carried a 117 Golf, and a CF19 Toughbook. And we give the Marines classes on a fob, right, in a tent. But then we'd have to actually go out and like get in a firefight and actually teach them by prac app on how to do it the right way, right? But it was so antiquated looking at where we're going today with handheld devices, that everything I had was tethered, So we'd get in a big gunfight with the Taliban, and I'd literally have to drop down the prone with a JTAC laying over top of me. We'd pull out the radio, we'd plug it in, we'd plug in the ISR receiver, we'd open up a laptop, a CF19 laptop, and we would lay there and wait for the bird to come in, because once we declare a tick, then we get ISR. So we'd wait for the bird to come in, and then we'd start basically orchestrating fire missions off of that. And it was very good for what we had at the time, because some of the other programs were just big, bulky, cumbersome, but everything was tethered, and I had wires everywhere, which is a real pain in the ass. So looking at where we can go today with wireless dongles now off of the Golf, that's a step in the right direction. And then looking at where we want to go, and the Marine Corps industry is going to be a big player in helping this out, but we want to be untethered. I'd rather have as few wires hooked into my kit as possible, right? So I got to figure out what's my transport mechanism, and then how do I secure it? And I'd want to have all my data. I say I'd want to, but I'm referring back to my time in combat and stuff. But I would want to have as much of my data not on that device as possible, right? I want it to be somewhere else, but I have to have access to it. Because if I lose it, I don't want it to become like a national incident, right? So you will drop things in combat, you will have to jettison packs, you will have to take off, and you will leave that device behind sometimes. You don't want to do that, but sometimes you do that. So how do I zeroize it? What's my data at rest capability? What is my data in transit capability? What happens to it? How does it get disassembled and then reassembled on the other side? So these are some of the challenges and stuff that from now back to Viasat, that we can help out with, industry can help out with. There's a lot of folks that can help out with it. And it's going to be, I think, a very interesting couple of years here as we get to where we want to be and where I wanted to be in 2010, 2011. So looking forward to the opportunity. Thank you, Mark.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Walsh. I work for the CO G6 of the Army. My job is pretty simple. It's to allow the soldier civilian to get away from their desk and do their job. It's a lot like the Marine Corps in the sense that we're trying to create one network, one environment, so that the workers, the guys that carry pencils, and the guys that carry rifles and weapons can actually work on the same environment and collaborate and communicate. A great part of what we're trying to do is take what the Army has as its mission and move it into the tactical space, taking advantage of commercial off-the-shelf technology. Obviously, that technology needs to be secured, and obviously that's work that we're working with our service partners, being the Marine Corps, the Navy. And as a matter of fact, today, our mobile strategy is being briefed to the General Officer Steering Committee in the Pentagon, which basically takes the combination of our strategic as well as our tactical side into one strategic document so that we can build one environment for mobile across both tactical and strategic.
JD.
Good afternoon. JD McCrary from Georgia Tech Research Institute and Chief Disruptive Technology Programs there. Background Navy Prowler, so I come at the problem from an electronic warfare perspective and was fortunate to wear ACUs in 2006, 2007, embedded in the ground with the SOF, Army, and Marine Corps, trying to understand the introduction of COTS into the Iraqi theater and what that meant to our forces while finding an adversary who's leveraging advanced technologies, living on our frequencies, us having to do manual deconfliction, and guys really making life or death choices about, do I have a jammer that protects me or do I communicate? And that's a ridiculous choice. So that really got me into the space of understanding what's necessary for spectral agility. We've heard lots of policy and acquisition kind of discussions, but at the end of the day, spectrum is a finite resource. And so I was, through some terrific luck, ended up being on the Presidential Council for Advisors for S&T on the Unleashing the Potential of Broadband, and looking at spectrum agility. That was really our number one recommendation to the president is you have to get out of this landowner and auctioning mentality and think about coexistence and maneuver within the spectrum, and how are you going to do that? And again, this isn't just at the Verizon, AT&T, and domestic, but really, you've heard other people talk about, if I'm going to take my device forward somewhere, I don't know where it's going to be, I don't know what their policy, I don't know what their usage is, and the adversary always gets a vote, right? They don't live by our policies, they don't live by our standards. So you have to have that agility. The other thing is, as you start scaling up to clumps of individuals and what are the tactical formations, how do you generate situation awareness and how do you execute command and control? And we need to leverage lots of things that we've heard talked about today: cloud computing, tactical edge, autonomy algorithms, adaptability and transformation algorithms, right? So lots of people are going to bring lots of algorithms, lots of gear. How do you stitch that together, and how do you leverage IBM Watson kinds of artificial intelligence to handle the things that in a firefight he shouldn't have to worry about a bunch of things. He shouldn't have to worry about the enemy's on my frequency, I have to find a new frequency, or how do I know where all the assets are that I need to execute my firefight, and how do I let a cloud architecture with spectral agility let me have constant communications, understand my environment, maneuver within that environment to my advantage and the adversary's disadvantage. And then how do DoD has, the other big reason that I'm here is I'm on the executive steering committee for the National Spectrum Consortium. We're not doing any briefs. There's going to be some postings on the AFCEA website that will tell you who the NSC is, what they're about, how to join, and really the difference between traditional and non-traditional. And that gets back to the IoT and the commercial technology and DoD needing to leverage where the industry is going, because industry R&D eclipses DoD R&D, and industry timelines eclipse DoD timelines. And so we really figured out we need a national spectrum consortium that's made up of industry and academia, traditional and non-traditional. And by non-traditional, it was really an effort to get those startups, get those people that don't normally work with DoD, enable some looser acquisition legal through an other transaction agreement. And so that has been negotiated with the government. There's, as you're aware, the Spectrum Relocation Fund has a fairly good chunk of money. So $500 million is being looked at by OMB for this year to be spent on spectrum agility projects that cover a lot of the things that you've heard throughout the day. So there's very specific projects that are going after this, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that. If you're not a member, please consider becoming a member. We want everybody's good ideas, right? This is a hard space, and this is a transactional agreement that really allows us to solve some of these problems and get away from some of that acquisition mire. So I'll leave it there.
All right, so I've got a list of questions that I'm going to go through. It's going to be to the panel, meant to elicit some good discussion out of these guys. And I'm receiving questions through the tablet. I got the tablet here, and I'll pepper those in as I can. So we'll start off with our first question to the panel. So what are the expected use cases and potential demand for mobile devices at the tactical edge over the next 5 years? So the use cases and missions.
I think I might be able to answer to that first, especially since you limited it to 5 years. Some of the things that JD spoke about and some of the things that we've talked about, I think might be out there at the 5-year mark and beyond. And in closer, there's a more urgent need for what they can be used for. And so those uses include, viewing of full motion video. We currently have UAVs all over the place that are piping out full motion video, and it sure would be nice if as I'm at, getting ready to step off the line of departure, I've got real-time intel of what it is I'm going to be stepping into, so I can see the other side of the building. I can see that, insurgents just ran from here to there with a machine gun and so on, so that we can adjust our plan on the fly with that. I can mark it down on my screen, hit send, and someone else who doesn't necessarily have a video receiver it's not receiving that video can see that I just changed the plan and marked it up, and that I marked, here's a machine gun emplacement. So I can send that stuff over to them, and then they can use that real time on the fly as we're getting ready to step off. It's important that we also understand that there's not this concept of, we see video of people walking down the street with their cell phones and they walk out in front of a car, because they're looking at this thing instead of their surroundings. So it's important that we stay grounded in the fact that this is not virtual reality. We're not moving into virtual reality. And so what we are doing is we're enabling the warfighter with tools that they can use to their betterment, as opposed to giving them, a virtual scene of what's going on in front of them. So they're still out there with their eyes and ears and looking at what's in front of them, and they're still like this. But at those key moments, when they can go head down, they can look at video, they can see the PLI information of the rest of the members of their unit, whether it be each fire team leader, each squad leader, or however that division goes out with the actual employment of the tablets or at that time, so that you can see where those people are. It's really bringing the JBCP, PLI, and C2 messaging to that dismounted individual, so that as soon as you leave your vehicle, you don't lose all of that information and all of that stuff that you had when you were with the vehicle and you had your JBCP unit right there, that you can just bring that system with you. So in the short time frame, and from my perspective, what programmatically, because a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, or that JD talked about specifically, is a little bit further out and not yet ready to be programmatic at this time. But what is ready to be programmatic is to take that use and push it down to that dismount so that he can use it in that manner. And then, of course, once we start doing that, the need for the more robust network and the things that are required at that point, continuous all the time connectivity, and some of those things will obviously show itself, and we can move forward with that at that time.
Does anyone want to pile on that? I know, on the commercial side, they have a lot of ways that they kind of envision, how they want to see their devices used. I know, Jamie, at your booth, I don't see y'all, at your booth, you have the gear, the VR, and the example that they have displayed in there is the ISR imagery, and they're viewing that through the virtual reality display. So to a certain aspect, commercial industry is saying, hey, this is, also potential,
Well, I think, 5 years in technology is a lifetime.
Yep.
Right? Think about how far we've come in the last 2 years. So is virtual reality, you brought up virtual reality, but could virtual reality be something that's used at the tactical edge in 5 years, be something that we see? Absolutely, in my mind. The ability to take that UAV image on a virtual reality headset, so now you're not having to pull out a tablet, you're not having to expose the light. So, yeah, virtual reality could definitely be something that's utilized in combat. The other thing we're starting to see are the use of smartwatches, right? And that's not necessarily for notifications, but for security or encryption. Being able to tie a device versus authentication to a smartwatch. So if you do have to jettison that smartphone, right, and leave that behind, if it's tied to the smartwatch, it can break that encryption, lock the device, potentially even wipe it. So use cases beyond what we traditionally think of as a smartphone or a tablet are use cases that we see the soldiers and the warfighters looking for and adopting. Because really, that's where these functionalities come from. Rick and I were talking before about how his nephew came up with an idea at his company about taking a simple picture of a document, saving on his phone for future reference. This generation that are using the devices, they grew up with these devices in their hands as an educational tool. That's how they think. So that's how they are going to develop these future applications, is how they use these devices. It's embedded in them. So I believe that they are going to find the ways to utilize this technology, and I think in the next 5 years, anything is possible.
So I guess given those particular use cases and the environment that we'll be executing those use cases and missions in, what do you guys think that the technical constraints are? What do you think that the environment and the missions themselves place on what solutions, the size of that solution space? Like we touched upon, frequency and maybe some actual security architecture-related constraints. But what do you guys think?
Well, for the Army, one of the biggest things we think about anytime we look at new technology is what we call SWAP, size, weight, and power. So right now, if I'm carrying a backpack or I'm carrying a device, I've got to power that device. Right now, batteries are big. So in the future, if we could do anything to support the soldier in the tactical workspace, I would ask to minimize and optimize power, because if I've got a smart device and I can't turn it on or it runs out of power, it's not really a smart device. It's now a weight that I have to carry. In the future, size, weight, and power are the biggest things that I want to look at. Heads-up display, so I don't have to look down. And I think that would be something that I would want to see on the tactical space in the future.
I think one of the, I really don't think technology is as limiting as, we've talked about contracting and acquisition, but I also think culture, the adoption, and from commanders in particular. It's not from the troops, right? So you could easily envision the technology is there to give global SA from, the private to the general. And then you have PKI about what you can do to influence that fight. But that's not the way we fight, and that's not the way we think, right? We think, all right, the big guy gets the big picture, the little guy gets the little picture. And we have lots of reasons for that. And I don't think, I think we need to think about a creative, innovative way of combat. If we're going to put technology in kids' hands, they are the ones that are coming up with the good ideas. So why don't you let them be a little bit more bought in? Yes, we're going to have command and control and chain of command and all that kind of stuff. But if you can see more, if you can access more, the more information you have available to you, the more situational awareness, the more innovation is going to be possible. And that can be at battlefield speed, scale, and scope. And I don't think it's really, I think technology is not the limiting factor there, but much more of a cultural issue.
Yeah, it seems to be that in some cases, it's our lack of resources that's really kind of inhibiting some of our pursuit of I guess, enabling it. Because, we can all see that, that it's technically feasible. From a policy perspective, I guess it's a policy issue, it's a resourcing issue. We want to use COTS. We want to leverage existing acquisition and acquisition processes, I guess.
Well, so if I can talk about a little bit, so Jamie talked about 5 years being an infinite amount of time for technology, and that's true. And you've heard other people talk about acquisitioning and contracting, how many years it takes to deploy. And by the time you deploy a device, it's obsolete. Nobody's supporting that device anymore. I got to give kudos, to the Marines, because I've spent some time out at Yuma and with the MOTS crowd, and there's some incredible TAC-D&E going on out there. And if you've heard of Exercise Talent Reach, some of the things they're doing with software-defined networks, software-defined gateways, because you really want to get away from, I don't care if it's Samsung, I don't care if it's version XYZ of this device, that device. If I am working in software-defined networks and software-defined interfaces that are protocol agnostic, right, and I can just add protocols, I can connect with anybody, and I can connect my networks to anybody, and I can pace the evolution of technologies and new protocols and allow for proprietary, right? Companies should be allowed to keep their proprietary status. It's an interface issue, and I really think the Marines are doing some very impressive work to create those kind of gateways for that flexibility.
Okay.
Hey, Donovan, to pile onto that as well, just big programs cost big dollars and they take, big calendar days to produce, right? So big is big, And like, JD alluded to, you're constantly fielding yesterday's technology tomorrow. But one of the things that I got out of my time in SOF with MARSOC was that when you have users have the ability to have options in what they use for their devices, then the argument of Android versus Windows doesn't really matter anymore, right? It becomes agnostic. And that kind of gets into like the applications themselves. You know, we were talking earlier about, you know, CPOP and C2PC and how long those things have been around and how little they're actually used, you know? When the younger generation just wants a handheld device on a flip-down chest rig, you know, whether it's a Galaxy or whatever it is, that's all they really want. It's something that's easily usable, that doesn't require a lot of training, because if you do a .mlpf analysis of the systems that we build in DoD, then the training piece is always the piece that we just forget about. And some of the stuff just becomes too complicated to use, you know? So gets kind of back into the world we want to be in 5 years. You know, I picked up, not to advertise for Samsung, because I don't have any of their products really except TVs, but I picked up the watch a little while ago, and my refrigerator's a Samsung, by the way. But I picked up their watch, and I'm scrolling through it, and I'm actually using this thing. I'd never even touched one until like, you know, 2 hours ago, right? And I already had it figured out in a matter of about 3 minutes. You know, that ease of use has got to be the way that we go in the future. It shouldn't require FSRs to come out and help set your stuff up for you. You know, like, you know, Viasat, I'm sure, would love to have a business model where they get paid to have FSRs go out there and do all your work for you. You know, but it doesn't make sense, you know, because FSRs don't go to real shooting wars. You know, Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, spent 7 tours in both places. We had FSRs everywhere. But if we were taking 300, 400, 500 rounds of incoming a day in like a real shooting war, they wouldn't be there. They'd all go home. You couldn't find the volunteers to sit on a fob and run your SWAN for you or run your COC for you. You know, so ease of use has got to be a factor. It's got to be intuitive, and we can't have long training periods for the Marines and the soldiers that are actually going to have to use the equipment, you know. You look at what we get out of a Marine, you know, an 0651 data Marine, right? We generally have them for 4 years, right? The majority of guys just EAS. They go on to college, whatever. But we only have them for 4 years. Well, boot camp and school end up eating up, especially for the technical MOSs, they end up eating up the first 8, 10 months of their time in the Marine Corps. The last 6 months is spent transitioning out. So you only really get them for like 1 deployment, 1 workup cycle, and then they're gone. And if it's too hard to use, they're not going to be able to use it.
So I think we have beat up acquisition pretty good today, and being the acquisition guy in the room, you know, we're attempting to put into place a program that will be able to rapidly flex to technology. What that means is that we're trying to get some contract vessels in place that give us a, you know, 5 years, say, of buy time through a distributor, not of a specific device. Meaning, because you can't buy a device for 5 years. 5 years ago, I could have bought a Note 2, but today I can't, right? So if I had tested and gone through the acquisition cycle with a Note 2, then the only way I could deploy it was if I bought 30,000 of them so that I had all of them that I was ever going to need, right? And that model doesn't work. You know, that nobody wants to see that model. And so the model that does work is that I get some contract vessels in place that allow me to rapidly purchase devices and, you know, just-in-time purchase. And then there's the whole CNA problem. Those things have to be, I have to be able to get them certified and get it through the DAA and have that on the ATO before I can put that device out. This is where the CSFC certifications come into play. With those certifications, we believe we can get there now. We believe that we can get through that process. If somebody brings a NIAP-approved device right off the bat, it's not going to take me very long to get through the process of having it certified, which means if I've got a contract that allows me to flex to the latest device that came off the shelf from that manufacturer, and it's NIAP approved already, then I'm ready to go do a 90 days worth of work in the acquisition cycle. You're going to have to do that work, get it through that certification, and then I can have it out there 90 days after it was made commercially viable, which puts us right in there with technology as it moves forward. So that's what we're trying to do from a programmatic perspective, is get the things in place so that we can do that. Now, the unfortunate thing is it takes some time to do that, to get those contract vessels in place and to get the stuff in place, to the processes in place to do that. And there's no way to get around. I have to take a system through that cycle. But at the end of that cycle, then it will be able to flex to the latest system, especially since I can't buy the system that we started with originally anyway. It's not in manufacture. So at this point, I have to be able to flex to that. And I think we're getting there rapidly from the acquisition perspective, where people are starting to see that we have the means to do this. And right now, we've got requirement and funding to put that program together. So that's what we're doing at Systems Command. So, and the usability part, as far as kids today, and I say kids, but young Marines, these men and women can use handhelds. They know what they're doing. My kids, who are that age, can do this much quicker than I can. They pick it up just like this. They don't talk to me on the phone anymore. They only text me because they're faster at it. And that's just the way it is, and so they're accustomed to it.
Yeah, so a big part of the process that you mentioned includes the NSA, and is a great deal. I mean, when we talk about commercial solutions for classified, we're almost, we know what it looks like on paper, but there's a certain esoteric aspect to it, right? Because we're talking about when we talk about tactile environment, we talk about tactile edge, we're talking about tailored solutions, okay? And so deviating from the capability packages that all the vendors are being told, is the spec, or is the standard, the reference architectures. Okay, and so, I mean, we've been through that CSFC process several times, and it's very hard to determine where that trade space is. So for tactical edge solutions, I'm not going to ask you to give an answer for the NSA, but from an industry perspective and from a government perspective, where do you think that trade space is? What are the things that absolutely must be met, from a security perspective, and what are the things that can exist in that tailorable piece of CSFC that where we kind of determine what that secure enough approach is?
So I'll take a stab at that from a vendor perspective. Since we've submitted, 18 or so devices through the NIAP process and have them on the NFC components or the CFFC components list, I think there are a couple problems to that. The first being, obviously, the cost involved with going through the NIAP process, trying to get the devices through. And obviously the acquisition part is part of it, right? The second piece is the use case that they put that together for. So traditionally, when we looked at, trying to certify a device and get it deployed, most use cases today were set for an enterprise or an office environment. So now you're trying to take something that Rick would deploy for someone that's sitting at a desk, and now trying to somehow fit that square peg into a round hole that a Marine or is using in the battlefield, right? And they don't exactly align. And then the last piece is the solutions part, right? So you take CFFC, it's a commercial solutions for classified components list. So we are one piece of the puzzle. Right, so we're the end user hardware for that, but there are many other pieces that go along with it: the networking piece, the encryption, et cetera. So, yes, we can get the device certified and we can have it ready for procurement, but it's what are the other pieces that go along with that solution? How do they interop with each other? Is the real piece, right? And so yes, we can hopefully have a device ready for them to buy and right off the bat. But those vendors and we as a vendor community need to work together, right, with the government to make sure that those pieces all fit together. So as technology comes out and refreshes, and the next big thing comes out, right, that we can plug and play that piece into that puzzle. So that procurement cycle becomes easier so that we can pull new technology in for that warfighter.
So I think from my perspective, your question about what pieces is it that we have to have, we spoke to it, and I think JD spoke to it. There's a data at rest requirement, and you said there's capability packages out there. It's not the capabilities package that I'm concerned with. It's the data at rest, and if it's slightly off from the capabilities package, but it gets the job done, then it's the good enough security, because then what we can do is go with a tailored package back to the NSA and get that package approved, and then operate off of that package throughout the life cycle, right? So we can tailor these things. So I think from the industry perspective, you're looking at, from the government perspective, what we want to see from industry is the data at rest, the data at transit. Now, if you look at the mobile capabilities package, data in transit, you'll see, dual VPN and all of these kind of things. We're not convinced that dual VPN is the only way to do this. From research and from dealing with different people, there are other ways to make this happen. And we would definitely entertain taking any of those methods that are approvable to the NSA to get included into a package, so that we could then certify against that and use those things. So I think if you get held up in the specifics of the packages that are out there, the packages didn't necessarily understand the use case, I think is what Jamie was alluding to. They were taking the square peg round hole problem. But if you understand the problem set, and it's one of, I'm not continuously connected, not right now. Now in the future, maybe we will be. And we certainly, I think once they get out there, the need will arise, the requirement will come forward, and we will become connected. But in the short frame, we're not connected continuously. And a soldier with a tactical radio is going to, Marine soldier, whoever, is going to move in and out of connection at all times. And so that makes a difference in what that capability package says.
But I'd argue that a little bit, because you're more connected than you think you are, right? Again, we're not just talking about handheld devices and voice comms, right? There are IoT-ish things going on in your unit all the time. You're transmitting data all the time. Sure. So as a unit, you are continuously connected, and you're going to get more and more connected. And something that, that James brought up, so it's not just the encryption package that you need to be worried about. So in my former life, one of the fun parts of my job is being a sneaky bastard, and how do you disrupt things? I don't need to break the encryption to screw with somebody's perception of the world. And so part of the security, again, can be learned from the Internet of Things in terms of what's the machine-to-machine trust, what's the profile of what I am connecting to, and there's a level of heterogeneous, hierarchical organization of this machine-to-machine communication that whether it's intentional or unintentional malfunction, do I trust the information that's coming from that sensor and aggregating up into decisions, and where's my degradation point, and where's my mission failure? What is good enough? I might accept some bad data, right? And how do I understand whether I'm being spoofed or just things aren't working? And I think we tend to we pile so much on encryption, we forget about the other elements of the overall information flow and mission management. And I think we need to, and again, I think there a lot to be learned from both the IoT and robotics. And there's a huge trend right now with netted distributed operations, whether that's ISR or other effectors. There's a lot of valuable information that applies. And again, my concern is, I know it's AFCEA, but communications means a lot more than it used to mean. And we really got to break out of a single handheld device and think about the entire network environment and all the information that's moving across that and all the decisions that it's contributing to.
I want to take a little bit different picture on this real quick, because we talk about the business process. We've actually discussed here in the short time on this stage 3 separate business processes that work in different calendars and different schedules. We talk about acquisition, we talk about training, we talk about industry. If the sweet spot is make those shorter and closer together, If a vendor can provide me a NIAP-approved device the same day that it hits the market, that shortens that workspace. If my acquisition cycle is set up to take advantage of that right away, that shortens that workspace. If I can make training mobile so that I can give the soldier, the Marine, the device with the training on it, and he's got downtime, he can train at the same time he's got the device. So training, we train for years. We built programs for years. Our organization today has over 1,000 pieces of courseware that are so old they don't want to update them, and they're classified improperly, and they cause problems when we try and train soldiers. What if I took those training courses and made them mobile, put them on a mobile device that was NIAP approved out of the box, that was on that device, that acquisition was in place? So the sweet spot is taking those disconnected business processes, bringing them together so that the time to decision, the time to effect is short. Right now, hardware comes out maybe once, twice a year. The industry's giving us some new piece of hardware once, twice a year. I've got to start my acquisition process now to buy something next year. I've got to start my training guys working on the templates, the training on the new hardware right now, new applications right now for next year. What if I could compress those times? I don't start at the end, I start in the beginning. So I backward plan so that when the new piece of bright and shiny hits the table, my guys can pick it up and use it, the training's on it, and I can buy it. So a little bit different, but the long pole in the tent is getting a working device in the hand of the soldier. So let's compress that window, not worry about, other stuff isn't critical and is important, but let's get it in the hand so it works sooner and faster.
Okay, we'll take a question from the audience. So this is a question from the media. What do you see or desire as the most significant advancement, development in tactical mobility in the short term?
So from a National Spectrum Consortium perspective, it's agility, right? Because if you have spectrum agility, if we do everything that you talked about, and I put a device in somebody's hands, and we live by today's standards, it's policy bound, it's going to be frequency bound, it's very manual oriented. You need these devices to be intelligently adaptive to their environment so they can continue to function in the face of, again, intentional or unintentional interference. And that would be an important point.
Okay. And one more. We talk about connecting back to the enterprise or being more connected than we think we are. And typically when we're tactical, and reaching back to the enterprise, we're leveraging things like PKI in order to do that. So the question is, does PKI authentication have a place in this combat environment? And if so, why?
I think authentication has a part in the environment. I don't know that PKI, as we know it today, does not. I think you need to know who the person is on with the device in hand, so the information they get is safe and properly maintained. But would I say traditional PKI is the solution today? Traditional meaning I'm not going to ask a soldier in a gunfight or a Marine to take out his CAC, put it into it, then put in his PIN, get it wrong the first time, and start over. We can't go there. So there's got to be some form of strong authentication, strong or adequate, good enough authentication, because it's what he has in his hands, and to actually accomplish the mission in a fashion that doesn't put him at risk, because I think he's more valuable than the device.
Right. And this goes back to your talking point about what's good enough security, right? The STIG today says I need to have a 10-digit alphanumeric PIN. If I've got bullets flying over my head, I don't want to sit there with gloves on, take it off, try to figure out my PIN. So what's good enough security? In my mind, good enough security is it's what's usable at that certain time in that mission requirement. So for me, what's the mission requirement? If I know I'm going into a firefight, good enough security could be a 4-digit PIN or a swipe, something quick and easy that I can access the device, but still have the ability that If I'm overrun, then I need to have the device locked down so that intelligence isn't compromised. That's good enough security. If I'm back sitting in my bunk and, trying to read a report, sure, maybe I need to have that. So the ability to have flexible security on that device or with that data, right, I think is what's most important, not necessarily for that device.
So I think a key piece of that we've seen from different vendors and ideas that have been brought is that you would open up the device for a unit of time equivalent to your mission. So in fact, if you were expecting to be going on a 6-hour raid, you could unlock the device for 8 hours. And at the end of 8 hours, it would relock. And then that way, during that time period, nobody's looking for PIN numbers, right? They're using the device, and it's unlocked during that time period. At the end of that time period, then it would relock, and then you would have to go back in and enter some digit in order to go on from there. So there's lots of ideas on how to get around that or to make that work, and that's what, right now we're inviting industry to come be a part of those ideas and help us figure out what does work, but that's one that I've heard.
I think you could combine it also with, so I like the temporal aspect. You could put spatial filters on it, right? There's all kinds of ways you could do. I think you could also do authentication to allow operations, right? So depending on what your job is, what your graded responsibilities. So authentication to provide different levels of access for operational purposes.
Role-based authentication. Yeah. So you log in as a user role, and then the different functionality comes to you based off of that.
Okay. So within the Marine Corps, and I'm sure this is true in other services, they're starting to proliferate data radios down to the squad level. And potentially below that. So how can DoD and industry support the need to integrate these mobile devices that exist at the squad level and potentially below into the tactical communications architecture and also into the larger enterprise architecture?
Integrate them?
Well, we could say the question again.
Yes.
So, I mean, we can, so these devices, they need to be, from a data perspective, need to reach back to some sort of data source, So, I mean, we can, at this point, we can get into the talk about, need for like a tactical cloud type capability, how we enable that, how do we enable that cloud, how we enable the connections between the different nodes, and what are the supporting fires that we need in order to make that?
I think this is a multifaceted answer, and there's a near-term, mid-term, long-term answer here. And the near-term is we have what we have. I have to work inside of the radios that are out there because of acquisitions and getting other networks out there and in place is going to take some time, as we all know. So from my perspective in our program moving forward with handhelds, we're fully moving forward with the idea that we want this to work in the tactical radio network that is in place, and to talk to the command and control structure that is in place. Midterm, my cell phone has, 4 radio transceivers in it, right? I've got my cell phone, I've got my Wi-Fi, my near field, and my Bluetooth. So I've got 4 abilities there to create my own radio without that tactical radio, right? So midterm, I would say we grow into some networking that uses those specific capabilities that are already there. And then long term, we're putting in place a more robust network that fills the line of what JD was speaking about a little bit later, and what near, mid, and long term is. Industry and DoD have a different viewpoint on that, but and it's just relative to the systems that we work in. But yeah, absolutely, there's a multifaceted answer there.
So the short-term complications that are going to come with pushing data radios down to the squad level is going to go again back to the training piece, right? So the way that we generally tie our data radios in the Marine Corps together now is that we'll run a regimental transport cloud of ANW2, and then we hang, that'd be a 5 megahertz channel, and then we hang 1.2 megahertz channel battalion nets off of that. But the node density in ANW2 is only set at 30 right now, and your performance gets degraded significantly when you start approaching to 30. It's just kind of the nature of the waveform, right? But when you put the squad radios in there, then the node density is going to increase such that you're going to actually have to have battalion transport clouds with company clouds hanging down off of it. Well, generally each battalion, back to how long we actually have an 0651 in the Marine Corps, now we're going to have this kid that is only with us for basically 2.5 years that's going to have to build this complex network. And we're going to run out of IPs. And we're going to have to, have him build these multi-cloud tied together through, /29 IPs, /28 IPs to hang multiple devices off of it. And it's going to be very complicated for him. So that's going to be the first challenge. The second one, like you alluded to, the midterm, getting into 4G LTE space, getting into Bluetooth space, getting into Wi-Fi space. The Rangers are doing that right now. The 75th Rangers are doing that right now, and they're having great success with it. So, is the Marine Corps ready for that? They're probably ready to start having the conversations right now. It would probably behoove the Marine Corps to work more with the Rangers and figure out what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and then take the lessons learned, because you can't rely on ANW2, you can't rely on SRW to be your only method of moving data down to these devices. It's going to become a beast under its own weight, and it won't survive, because the battalions generally have 1 or 2 really smart data guys. And those 1 or 2 guys can't be everywhere at one time. There's just no way to get them across the battlefield in a distributed environment.
I think the other piece is going to be a policy perspective, right? The technology's there, but the policies in place to implement those technologies may not necessarily be there because of the encryption required, et cetera. So I think that's one hurdle. But I agree with the rest of the panel. I think that we can get there. I think the end-all goal is to outfit everybody with a device so they can communicate, right? Having that situational awareness, regardless of who you are, and instead of having a platoon leader with the only one having it, everyone should be able to communicate amongst each other. So policy is one of them that I think is going to be one of the hardest to overcome.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. So I guess focusing in on the AWS-3 auction. So it's yielding about $1.25 billion in R&D money. And given our need at the tactical edge for more bandwidth and more data, where do you think that these dollars should be spent?
Well, so I'll weigh in from a National Spectrum Consortium. So the DoD leadership has made the decision. So there's an allocation of money, half a $500 million, that's going to DoD R&D. There were 5 priorities. All this is listed on what's going to be posted. There's briefs and brochures that'll be posted on the AFCEA website. So the C5LB DoD leadership has determined these are our priorities. And there's 2 tranche of release of how the money's going to get released. And the first tranche is for AWS-3. And then beyond that, it's going to be operational enhancements. So there's strict rules that NTIA is going to enforce, ensuring that the reason that money came out of the SRF is so it can be applied to these specific problems. So there's tremendous oversight in how the money is going to be spent. And so the NSC, again, was established to allow this rapid contracting, innovation by bringing in non-traditional partners. And it's a great back and forth between the government and industry and academia that says, warfighters have identified problems. Hey, technology community, can you solve these problems? Do you think we're talking about the problems in the right way? Let's work back and forth. It's an open kind of discussion. It's not a closed, and the government gets to pick and choose. There's no protest. So it's very, very much designed about not selling product that the government doesn't need because the vendor wants to sell it. It's about specifically solving very identified problems. And so there's just tons of information available to get into the details of that. But I mean, frankly, the decision has been made because the services have spoken. The services have said, we have problems in the training environment, in the data link environment, in spectral agility, in radar and communications. So the problems are very well identified. Leadership has identified it. Congress has bought off on it, and the money is, it's actually an incredibly exciting story considering how far away from this we were only 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. I think that just about does it for this particular panel. I want to thank the panelists for their time, and hope this was helpful for you guys. And there are several questions I couldn't get to during the discussion, but we'll definitely reach out to you and make sure that those get answered. So again, thanks a lot.
Before we go, there's a lot of industry people in the room, and I want to let everybody know that we do have an active RFI out right now, and for this very use, and we are looking to stimulate as many responses and questions to that RFI as we can. The dates, are very near term. In fact, the date for questions on that RFI has already passed, but we will accept some questions if some questions have been stimulated today to go back into that RFI. And any help that we can get from industry to push that forward and get us into an RFP process this summer so that we can answer this, at least in the short term here for the Marine Corps would be greatly appreciated. So if anybody wants to go look at that, that's my plug.
You want to give them the number?
I didn't look it out with me, but that's okay.
Okay, and I guess I'll hand it back over to Randy, and thanks a lot, guys.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Murphy, and I'm honored to introduce to you our next panelist, Mr. Morgan O'Brien, Vice Chairman of PDV Wireless. Mr. O'Brien is serving as Vice Chairman of the Board of PDV Wireless Incorporated, a private carrier wireless communications provider of mobile workforce management solutions. From January 2009 to the present, Mr. O'Brien has served as an independent consultant to several wireless startups and as a member of the board of directors of GTT Communications Incorporated. As the co-founder and chairman of Nextel, Mr. O'Brien led the creation of the first all-digital nationwide wireless network, the Nextel National Network, and brought push-to-talk communications to the mass business and consumer markets. With that, I ask you to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Morgan O'Brien.
Thanks, Mike, and it's good to be here. The job I have been assigned for this afternoon is to give the perspective on mobile wireless and what's happening in mobile wireless from the commercial perspective. And I thought it might be helpful if I started with how I started in the wireless business. It was in 1970. I was fresh out of law school and had just finished clerking for a federal appellate judge and decided that the Federal Communications Commission, I was a native Washingtonian, so I decided Federal Communications Commission was the right place to start a career, and I began to hammer on their doors, and this was during the Vietnamese War, and it was virtually impossible to get a government job for a lawyer. But finally, to just quiet my hammering, they gave me a job in what was then called the Mobile Services Division of the Common Carrier Bureau. And there I found a docket, which was docket 18262. And that docket had been underway since 1965, perhaps 1966. So this was just about 50 years ago. And this docket was an absolutely transformational decision-making process by the Commission. But this will sound familiar, I think. It was the result of too much demand and not enough supply of spectrum for mobile services, and what was perceived to be an oversupply of spectrum by the broadcasters. And so it was a reallocation from the broadcast industry to mobile, and out of that reallocation came the cellular radio industry and also the SMR radio industry. Now it had taken, this is a significant fact, it had taken the FCC 14 years to get this process to the point where that spectrum was reallocated from broadcasters to mobile services, because the broadcasters are such fantastic bureaucratic infighters and have just unbelievable, as you can imagine, broadcasters have the most impeccable connections with Congress, because every congressperson is dependent on a local broadcaster for access to the airwaves. And so when the FCC sets out to take something away from the broadcast industry, back in those days, figure 14 years. What became a defining moment for me in my career is the other industry that was created, not just cellular but SMR. And by 1987, I got together with a bunch of other colleagues and decided to create a company called Nextel. One of those colleagues is Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Another colleague is Governor Jack Markell of Delaware. So these folks definitely went on to bigger and better things. We created Nextel, and the elements of Nextel, and this is relevant to the way spectrum decisions are made even today. We saw an opportunity that the SMR industry was using 800 megahertz frequencies, and those 800 megahertz frequencies were being underutilized as compared to cellular radio frequencies, which were functionally identical. So the commission took a portion of the spectrum that they reallocated from broadcasters, created two different technologies, cellular and SMR. One was far more efficient. So the perception of Nextel in 1987 when we started it is that we could aggregate licenses at 800 megahertz SMR and then rely on the FCC and go to the FCC and see if we could get the outdated rules changed so that that spectrum would be freed up and would then become as valuable as and could support mobile communications as productive as cellular. So our story there, we started with, and this is I always say this is an only in America story. We started in 1987 with $125,000. That was our initial seed money investment. 17 years later, we had created a company that had 15,000 employees, 20 million customers, and was valued in a merger with Sprint in 2005 at $35 billion. Looking back, saying, well, what were the critical success factors for Nextel? They were that we were able to identify and acquire spectrum that was undervalued relative to its full potential because of the regulatory environment in which it was originally created. But most important of all, and this is kind of my theme, most important of all is we relied on a bedrock principle of Federal Communications Commission regulation, which is that always their bedrock principle is to move spectrum to higher and better uses, to increase efficiency of spectrum, to encourage new technology, and thus to promote competition in the mobile services. And any of you, and I'm sure every one of you is a smartphone user, I'm sure you're familiar with playing one competitor off against the other, and it's amazing what the competitive environment created by the FCC has permitted for consumer benefit. So we bet the ranch that the FCC would change the rules based on these bedrock principles and not listen to the chorus of opposition from potential competitors. And we turned out to be right. The FCC changed the rules to promote new efficiency and created an entire new industry where Nextel became a very effective competitor to the entrenched cellular carriers, and then ultimately merged with Sprint. So that was 1987 started, ended at 2005, ended at 2005 when the merger took place. Figuring that sometimes you can repeat a success story. In 2014, some of the Nextel veterans and I joined together and created a company called Pacific Data Vision Wireless, or PDV Wireless. And you'll recognize some of these themes. We looked for and found spectrum which was undervalued relative to comparable spectrum because it was is locked into an antiquated regulatory scheme. It's locked in a scheme that was first created in the 1980s. So we identified that spectrum. Just as in Nextel, we were able to tap into the capital markets. I'm glad I'm not trying to do it in the capital markets today, but this was roughly in the last year. We took the concept of acquiring spectrum, the track record of the team, the current regulatory environment, and we were able to raise $300 million to buy the spectrum and create a new business plan. So that was 2014. And the elements were identify the spectrum, acquire the spectrum, use that spectrum, and put that spectrum into productive use immediately, not be a speculator, but go into productive use with current technology. But again, accept the FCC on its word and on its congressional mandate that the FCC, when approached with a reasonable proposition, wants to encourage competition. There could always be more competition in the wireless world. Incentivize the introduction of new technology, and also deregulate. So that's the regulatory environment in which we find ourselves. The current status of where things are with with PDV, is that we're just past 1 year in the process at the FCC laying out a new vision for the spectrum. We became a public company in February of 2015. We've hired 70 very smart, very aggressive people, and we're working through the elements that are necessary in today's world to get a new technology introduced into existing spectrum. And this is one of the things that anyone looking at spectrum, whether that spectrum is currently licensed to federal government use or whether it's currently licensed to commercial, all spectrum is vulnerable to being looked at because there is no longer any such thing as virgin spectrum. In the old days, the FCC, when some new technology or some new exciting use came up, frequently they would be able to find spectrum and just sort of muscle their way in and create virgin spectrum for a new use. I mean, those days are gone. And the way I like to look at it is the role of innovator is now necessarily tied to the role of disruptor. And any innovation in wireless will have to be accompanied by disruption, and the disruption is the disruption of current incumbents and current technology. So if you were to look at the record of what the FCC has done since our process started in November of 2014 at PDV is comments, reply comments, back and forth as we, the innovator, and the party seeking to introduce new technology confronts the reality of incumbents and the incumbents who have no desire to be relocated or in other ways accommodate a new technology. And so that's the FCC battleground that we now face. It's to me, it's a extremely civilized and rational process. I contrast it to some of the other policy-making forums in Washington, D.C., but here you're talking about a process that is controlled by the Administrative Procedure Act and an agency in which you can criticize it occasionally, but it's an agency which makes decisions based on the facts that are produced in a record and based on its core principles. The Communications Act was rewritten in 2005, and right in the organizing language, Congress, which of course FCC is a creature of, Congress says this act is to promote competition. It is to reduce excessive regulation, and it's to encourage the introduction of new technology. So in an environment in which all spectrum is occupied, how does the FCC respond to that mandate of promoting more competition, deregulating, and encouraging new technologies? Well, the answer is through a series of processes. And so we're in one process. We're in the process of on-the-record rulemaking. If a party wants to make a comment in this proceeding, that party, and wants to go and talk to the FCC about it, the FCC 100% open to that, but that party has to summarize the comments they're making and put them on the record. So everybody knows who went in to talk to the commissioners and what they said, and then has the same equivalent right to go in and make a counter argument. So very rational process. Typically these things take 18 to 24 months. We're in month, say, 14. And stay tuned, we'll see how it goes. In essence, we're proposing to pay to remove systems that are operating on certain frequencies and just retune them to other frequencies. It doesn't mean doesn't mean literally moving the systems. It means just reprogramming radios from one part of the band to the other, thus creating broadband spectrum, which is some large multiple of more efficiency, can accommodate new technologies, and therefore much more competition, much more efficient technology. So that's where we are. Stay tuned to see how that process works. If you're looking at overall, how is the FCC and how is the private sector reacting to the unprecedented demand? I saw a report by Cisco issued in February of 2015 that predicts that from 2014 to 2019, the data usage in the United States will multiply by a factor of 10. So the way to look at that is every wireless network, all the broadband capabilities that are currently straining to support current use and is playing around with data plans and slowing down and everything else. Between now and 2019, they have to be ready for 10 times as much demand, mostly, of course, video, as video essentially takes over the mobile communications environment. And it's a good thing. It's, how many of us don't appreciate it and use it? So there are two proceedings at the FCC, which I think are, of course for me, because I've been at this for so many years, are so fascinating. One is the incentive auction, which is supposedly going to happen this year. And remember what we said about docket 18262? Too much demand for mobile, broadcasters using or licensed to way too much spectrum. Docket 18262 took 14 years to get that spectrum away from the small user, low user, into the hands of the demand. This incentive auction is a completely different, more modern approach where the FCC, and we'll see how it works, in which the FCC is going to permit the broadcasters, instead of just being moved out of the way after losing a series of bruising battles and court cases, they're going to permit them to offer to sell their license or offer to share their license in a reverse auction where they put a number on the table for the price at which they'd exit their license, and the wireless industry comes in and bids to see if they get a bid high enough to take that broadcaster out. So that incentive auction is just an evolution of the process. It's the exact same process that's been going on at least for the last 50 years, and it's moving one technology, one set of users out of the way, squeezing them down, compacting them, so that another more novel technology can take hold. So that's the incentive auctions. Very interesting process to watch. But I think even more interesting to watch is the 3.5 proceeding, in which the commission is really taking virtually every spectrum management technique ever used and putting them all together. So just the essence of it. In the first place, it's a mind-boggling amount of spectrum. It's 150 megahertz of spectrum. Just as a way to relate to the 150 megahertz of spectrum, at times in the acquisition phase of Nextel, I would get on an airplane in Washington, D.C., fly to Los Angeles to try to buy a channel, get the channel, fly back, and I would say to myself, well, that was a satisfying trip. I bought a 25 kilohertz channel, which is 1/6000th of 150 megahertz. Now, I will also point out that that 25 kilohertz channel is still being actively used 23 years later, so it's, that's sort of the name of the game. But in any event, 3.5, the commission is trying the following. In the first place, there are incumbents. So the incumbents are going to stay, but they are going to be surrounded by zones that are created, and they are protected electronically, but they are allowed to continue to operate. Then there are two tiers of additional users, the first tier of which will be auctioned off the right to operate on the spectrum, and the third tier of which is open, unlicensed, anybody can use it. So all of this is going to be done by what in the private radio services, it's very similar to the private radio services where shared spectrum was made workable by frequency coordinators who were guys with green eye shades looking at maps and plotting contours. This is going to be done in some real-time, radio sniffing technology, which has been pioneered by Google. So all of the concepts used to make spectrum maximally efficient and to promote all the FCC's goals are wrapped up in this 3.5 proceeding, which many people think it's never going to work. It's very controversial, whatever. But for those interested in the history of these things and where things are going, it's a fascinating thing to watch. I have enjoyed this opportunity to talk to you about spectrum management and the role of the disruptor in my life and what I'm doing. If anybody has any questions, totally glad to answer them. Michael.
So, Morgan, this consensus auction that's coming up, when from your
You're,
point
you mean the incentive
or
auction?
incentive, yeah. When,
I think if they had a consensus, they'd be really happy, but instead they have an incentive.
right.
Yeah.
From your viewing point, when do you think that will actually happen?
Almost anybody you ask is going to give a different answer. My answer cues off the fact that while I have no direct knowledge of this, I would certainly guess that Chairman Wheeler has it as his number one objective. And since his term is likely to be coterminous with President Obama, he probably is really motivated to get it off in 2016, to get it off this year. And I have been in my career the beneficiary so many times of FCC innovation, and I have been promoting it so many times that I'm going to be the last one to say it will never work. I mean, there's a lot of forces moving this. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that on average, in any TV market across the country, there are 18 broadcast stations. Most people, if you ask them that question, they think 3, 4, 5. There are 18 licensed stations. But the fact of the matter is, generally, only the top 3 or 4 make money. And so if the FCC says, how would you like to sell that license of yours, for which you probably paid nothing, at least the original licensee paid nothing, how would you like to sell that license and get out of this money-losing business? I'm guessing that there's going to be a lot of responses. But of course, in the meantime, everybody's posturing like crazy, just like you'd expect. The wireless guys are saying, we're not really sure we're interested in that spectrum. It's really, whatever. And the broadcasters are saying, why would we ever leave this fantastic business? So I have learned to expect that when the rubber hits the road and the real dollars show up, things happen. If you have the FCC has a lot of very smart people in it.
And one last question, Morgan. Do you see any innovative players coming along that can actually go up against the big 3 or 4, depending on how you look at them?
Well, I think the answer is yes. When we started Nextel, a lot of the really smart people I went to see attempting to raise money said, mobile wireless communications, all the oxygen in the room is taken up by the 2 cellular guys, A and B, and there isn't really any room for you. And I think probably at that point they might have been serving 10 or 15 million customers. So now that each of the top 2 have 100 million or more customers, we went around and raised $300 million to essentially get back into the space in a different role, of course, but there were enough people, serious investors, to back that. And I think in general, mostly because the FCC consistently operates according to that congressional mandate, those bedrock principles, there's always an advantage to be the disruptor innovator, because no one likes what happens in a monopoly or duopoly environment. Because just think about that. If you only had 2 operators in wireless, and they each had roughly comparable subscribers, and they have just finished paying for the last technology, what is going to move them to the next technology? So while we're waiting and looking enviously at what's happening in Korea or Japan or someplace else, they're sitting on their hands waiting to see how long they can drag this out. I think it's fair to say that when Nextel entered the space, we advanced the deployment of analog, of digital over analog. We eliminated a lot of roaming, rip-off roaming rates. We innovated in a lot of different ways because we had to, because we were struggling against these mighty odds. So is it a fun prospect to think about going after companies that have 100 million customers and the revenues to match? No, but if you have a regulatory environment, you have technology. I mean, every time I turn around, somebody's telling me about a new unbelievable technology that's going to make spectrum 10 times more efficient. I mean, those are the seeds out of which new entrants can come in. So I'm inferring from that environment that they will. I mean, we're certainly doing the best we can in a small way.
Thank you very much, Morgan.
Out of time. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric McGrain with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker. Our final speaker today is Randall Conway, Principal Director to the DCIO for Information Enterprise in the Department of Defense, Chief Information Office. Mr. Conway is a member of the Senior Executive Staff and is currently serving as the Principal Director to the Deputy CIO for Information Enterprise. Mr. Conway has extensive experience in planning, training, and operating, engineering and managing communication systems, services, and applications within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Joint Staff, United States Army, Joint Operational Commands and Organizations, and the MITRE Corporation. As the Principal Director to the Deputy CIO for Information Enterprise, Mr. Conway provides technical expertise, policy guidance, and leadership to drive OSD processes and actions to realize an integrated department-wide implementation of the Joint Information Environment and its primary subcomponent called the Joint Regional Security Stack capability. Additionally, he advances other DCIO and CIO priorities in the areas of cloud computing, mission partner environment, and enterprise services for the larger DoD information enterprise. He supervises the development of implementation plans, budgets, their execution measurements, resourcing strategies, and ensures DoD-wide information technology standards are prescribed and enforced, and recommends the elimination of duplicative IT systems within the DoD information environment. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Randall Conway.
All right. I'm glad I'm here now. I had to switch with the person this morning because something came up. One thing I want to say up front real quick, because this picks up from where we left off last summer, is that, from the DoD CIO standpoint, we are definitely committed to mobility and wireless for the department, and commercial mobility, commercial wireless solutions. And what we're trying to do with Mr. Halverson, the DoD CIO, is that we're trying to break down barriers so that we can get some of this capability in the hands of our employees. Okay, because we got about 4 million, if you count contractors, contract support, active duty military, active civilians, reserve, National Guard, you're pushing 4 million people, right? And the way commercial capabilities are today, they're a lot better than some of the things that we have in the department because of the way we developed them. So my briefing here is really just to stick with the mobility piece, let you know what we're doing with our mobile solutions, and I'll touch a little bit on wireless, but I'll get into how we evolved from about 2013, where we are today, what we have in our portfolio, just kind of a snapshot, a little bit about our security approval process, some tactical implementations that we're trying to pursue and we're in support of with our military departments, and I got some other related topics that might generate a question or two. So when you look at how we've evolved mobility over the years, starting here with 13, we were basically BlackBerry, and that's what we had. All right, it worked great. And the capabilities we got on BlackBerry was basically email, calendar, and we had contacts, and that served us well, and it connected to what we call our NIPRNet. And we were able to send and receive messages while we were traveling or while we were on the road in various places, and it worked outstanding. And then basically, there was, BlackBerry got in trouble, I think, with, and we weren't sure if they were going to, I think they were in the throes of bankruptcy, and a lot of people were wondering if they were going to climb out of it. During that same time frame, we had this explosion in basically Android devices and Apple devices, and we said, whoa, wait a minute here. Maybe we ought to move forward by having a multi-vendor approach. And so that's when we got into this, well, let's see if we can add some other capabilities to the department for our users so they can have a richer experience with their communications capability. And so we went through the DoD's program review process. During this year, I led it. We were able to convince our programmers to allocate dollars so that we could start this, what we call an enterprise mobility capability. And we gave that to Defense Information Systems Agency, and then they pretty much stood that up, and that's kind of where we are today with this capability, and we're kind of advancing it here into the 2016 range. And we've made just a tremendous amount of progress in terms of devices, infrastructure, and services, and what we're trying to offer our folks. Okay, so they can kind of have a similar capability on the DoD workforce side as they do on their civilian when they go home side. So when you look at our unclassified capability, which is what this chart shows, a lot of information on there. But we got infrastructure, policies and standards, and then what we want to do with apps. And sort of we have a strategy we put out. And then over the years, we've rolled in, the arrows kind of point somewhere in terms of that fiscal year when we kind of rolled in that capability. Okay? And we struck out on some things because we couldn't get through some kind of a barrier, and some things just didn't suit us that well. But we managed to get through a lot of things. One of the big things we did in 15 was this derived credentials, because one of the things you do to get on the NIPRNet is we had our PKI token, or CAT card, and we found ingenious way to derive that onto, take the existing card through a software program, derive it, and have it loaded onto your mobile device. And so because we didn't want to go with that's a sled, so we didn't want to have a sled, because, my goodness, who wants to walk around with that thing on their, attached to their handheld? And so now we're looking into, wearables. Wearables are coming out. And I would say that, having been doing communications for so many years, that, I just can't even imagine all the possibilities here with wearables for the military, if we can figure out a way to use them. Just a miniaturization of them and what capability you could probably get from that could be tremendous. Internet of Things is another thing that's coming into play that is going to challenge us, because it's going to open up possibilities for us that we probably didn't have before, but it's also going to introduce vulnerabilities to us and threat vectors. And so we have to be very careful how we handle the Internet of Things. And so that's pretty much how we're doing it. We have policy that we put out. We work with NIAP for protection profiles. We have to engage with the federal government, what the federal government wants to do for mobility, so that we can have common solutions across the federal government versus just DoD doing one thing, Department of Homeland Security doing one thing, Department of Treasury doing one thing. And we have this Fed CIO council structure that allows us to try to share and come up with common solutions. And then that's pretty much how we keep moving, and quite frankly, we lag behind technology all the time. And that's just kind of the state that we're in DoD. We're always like a generation behind in some user devices because we have so many wickets we have to go through to get things approved. Once we buy a lot of devices, it's very hard for us to turn those over as quickly as you could if you had your own personal device. So just to touch base here on the approval process here, our partnership with NSA, with NIAP, and coming up with this common criteria and evaluation and validation. And we've got these protection profiles, MDMs, we've come up with a mobile device fundamentals, a protection profile. We have some vendors that have got things, there are certain status of where they're at with some of their protection profiles, either validated, they've submitted. We've got application software, guidance for vetting apps on our platforms, and then here in the protection profiles, I think there's like 17 countries that's involved in this. What this is to say that we have a separate annex for some of the DoD things that we do. But I think we've engaged this with industry and the federal government to make sure we're all doing the same things in a similar way. On our classified capability, if you guys have even been with DoD at all, you'd know that we were a GOTS-based solution set for many years. In these early years where they were just phones. And then we came up with a SMEPED where we could do data, we could move information around. It was all 2G. This was a very bulky device, very thick, very hard to use, very cumbersome. And then we decided that, you know, the infrastructure is moving faster than we want to cling to things. And so we had to get out of this 2G because we were losing our infrastructure. And we had a bulky device that we really no one wanted. So we experimented here with some other ones, some COT solutions, okay? And you can see how we tried a Droid Pro and the Razor Max. These are just some names of some that we tried. And we really hit it off well with this Samsung device. We got a good business proposition with them, and we was able to get some at a very low cost. We modified them, and it became our initial classified solution for how we connect the DoD user to our classified computing network. That's, we call that CIPRNet. And we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 users that are certified and authorized to have one of these devices so they can send and receive email, make a phone call on a secure, secret level class device. And it's been a big hit for us. Now, this is not the latest, greatest, device. I mean, Samsung has moved, there's like a couple generations already ahead of that one, but it still works for us. And so now we're moving into this area where we're looking at top secret capability for a small segment of users so they can be connected to a top secret computing network. That's going to be way less than 1,000. But that is for a certain segment of our government that we're going to provide that capability to so that they can have that. We're making tremendous progress in this area. And I would say that just how it's exploded since we've started and got our funding and helped DISA get established, how DISA has really moved out on the classified capability and the unclassified capability so we can have an enterprise solution. And that's what we've been trying to pursue with the department. But we do let the military departments have some latitude, and they do have some of the same capability, and we let them run them at their level. So we're not trying to be the sole solution, but we do have an enterprise capability that is very valuable to the department. When you look at some of the tactical implementations, one of the things that I just picked up on, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with some of the department's communications programs. This is the Warfighter Information Network Tactical. This is what we deploy when we go to do an operation like in Afghanistan or Iraq or some other place. The Army would deploy with their tactical WIN-T gear, okay, which provides the backbone infrastructure for the deployed forces for the Army when they're fighting. Well, for years and years and years, when we stood up a command post, it was wired. So imagine taking the things that you find in an office building, wherever you work, and it's all wired, and you then imagine these guys are doing the same thing in the field. They're wiring everything together in the field. They're under a tent, or they're trying to run under a canopy of camouflage covering, and they're just running cable. And so what the WIN-T program just did this month was they got a contract let, and there was a winning vendor to do a wireless capability in their command post. So this is huge for the Army. I mean, it makes their setup and tear down time it's literally almost a day or two before sometimes it takes forever to get these things set up. but with wireless capability that they want to put in the command post, they can hit the ground running, they can be ready to operate, and then they can pick up and move much quicker than they could before. Now that's a wireless situation, but there's a way where you can connect a mobile phone to that, okay, and have communications capability within a certain footprint of that command post if you put up, you know, an antenna and have the other back-end infrastructure there, which the WIN-T program is going to have as part of their larger employment of the wireless capability. And you see it today in Iraq. I mean, they got a setup over there now where the contract award winner for some of the bases in Iraq, they provide a capability for the troops there where they have a wireless capability. They can use their mobile phone that they bought here in the United States. They can take it over there, and through the wireless connection there, they can use it. And for, you know, calls to home and things like that. And they provide a fee, they charge, and then it's a small fee for the troops that they want to use it. And they're using just WhatsApp. How many people have heard of WhatsApp? Well, WhatsApp, they're using WhatsApp. So my son's over there, I can call him on WhatsApp. It's amazing, it's fascinating how that works. He's got that loaded on his smartphone. I can call him from my house whenever, you know, I think he's like 7 or 8 hours difference. And then I can reach out and touch him, and his wife can call him when he needs to, but they're using WhatsApp. And it's a wireless connection, and it's been provided by the contract winner for that life support capability at the base he's at. So this is huge, but what you get here is you can actually put that capability, something like that, right there in the tactical formation. So I think it's just wonderful they got that. One of the things to do with this Air Force Electronic Flight Bag program, which is something that we partnered with the Air Force, and they were trying to come up with a way to, instead of, they have to lug a lot of you know, printed material onto the aircraft with them, with their tech manuals and some of their flight instructions, and it was just a boatload of textbooks and manuals that tech manuals that they had to bring on the flight with them. So what they did was they came up with this concept of using, and I think this here might be a picture of an iPad as a solution, where they were going to load all that and have that capability so that they could take all that with them and then have it refreshed quicker prior to takeoff, and then use it while they're in flight if they needed to, and then do it when they get, and you know, refresh when they get back on the ground. But the whole idea here was that you could upload capability onto a mobile device and then eliminate all of that extra, you know, tech manual, tech material you'd have to carry with you. We've had a big success with this. We let them connect on the ground, and they can have wireless connections on the ground to make sure this works. I think on that, I don't really want to have anything, I don't have much to say here. I think the Army is still working this. It's how they're going to pursue that. I think it's still a lot of trial and error there. On the combat training centers, this is like if you go to the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana. It's the back end. It's what the observer controllers use to communicate when they're evaluating the military formations they go through. And so they're using, you know, basically the same stuff that we use today as a civilian there, and we let them do that. So there's a lot of things that we do on this tactical implementation that we support from the DoD CIO to basically allow the parts of the department have more better experience and more capability than what they normally have with their tactical communications gear. So on related topics, what I want to do is touch base on just some things that we might stir some discussion, or basically just let you all know that we go to meetings, we read things too, and we get exposed to things, and sometimes there are challenges for us, and sometimes there's things that we would seek folks like you to help us solve. One of the things here, the Internet of Things, you know, of course, is one of the things we've heard a lot about, and we understand how it works, and conceptually it's fascinating if you think about it. But on the military standpoint, there's a lot of concern about security, you know, and how we authenticate things and how we would do that because of the vulnerabilities. And it's just the cybersecurity is now taking a life of its own, and it's becoming one of the most important things that we have to do in the department. is defend our networks. And so when we get to Internet of Things, we got to be careful because it's very, very hard to defend everything, to defend everything well. And so, but we see it as disruptive technology, it's a disruptive capability, and we're going to have to deal with it because there's the good and the bad. There's a balance. I think some folks wanted me to talk a little bit about spectrum, but I was going to say that I was talking to one of our guys from our spectrum office, and he was making mention that the industry is looking at LTE unlicensed, and it's basically a concept of LTE operating in the Wi-Fi spectrum, and they're looking at new standards and protocols to kind of make that work, which is another very creative thing that we could benefit from. We're just now getting exposed to that. We're really not part of that. We'll see what comes out of this, of some of the meetings that they have with this. But there's an example of on the spectrum side where that could have some change into how we do stuff. Another one on spectrum here was this. One of the things we've been doing in spectrum is there's been these sell-off of spectrum. There's been this reallocation of spectrum. Where we occupy spectrum in the military side, a lot of the industry wants some of that spectrum so that they can, the broadband, all of that, so we can extend services and capability to, the greater part of America. So there's always this, reallocation or relocation. And when there's a big fee and there's a sell-off, and then we have to go find a place to relocate our tactical communications gear so that we can continue to operate it. So one of the things we're looking at in the spectrum side is this bi-directional sharing to provide improved opportunities for increased spectrum access. And specifically, it's shared access by federal users to non-federal bands. And so maybe there's a way here where we can do more sharing than relocating. Because we can't always be in the relocate mode. It's just the gear we buy, a lot of it, we do a lot with radios, and a lot of it is non-reprogrammable equipment, which leaves us in a big problem spot because it's almost impossible for us to move out of the spectrum that the radio was designed for. We're getting better with that. We got a lot of software-defined radios now in the inventory that can be reprogrammable, but we still have a lot of legacy that can't, and so it's a big problem for us to relocate. But one thing we do is we reach out now. We have a better reach-out capability with technology, not just for mobility or for wireless, but we do it for all kinds of things that like a typical DoD, like a typical CIO would be responsible for. Okay, data centers, computer networking, computer protections, anything from, like for example, we've just in the last 18 months, we've made like 3 trips to Silicon Valley with some key leaders in the department on the IT side. We've made our first trip to New York and Boston to interact with some industry counterparts up there to try to learn about how they do things within their organizations so that we can take some of that back and try to make it better for us in DoD. So one of the things we do, and this is an example of us reaching out to people right here in our area to try to, share information on how to make things better on the mobility side. We do it, we've been doing this for other areas too, so that we can learn more and be better engaged with, try to perhaps map a better future or predict where things are going or to understand trends, and it's very helpful for us. A lot of guys ping us a lot about BYOD. There's a lot of people that thought that was the greatest thing in the world. Let's do this, bring your own device, and this is going to be great for us. We're going to save costs, we're going to save money, it's going to make the employee happier. But we've been taking a slow approach to that because of privacy concerns, security concerns. So I could say to you right now that we do have a very, very small pilot that we're sponsoring out of the DoD CIO on this area, but it's based on volunteers. And even if you do anything with BYOD, it's going to be volunteer-based. So we're seeing how many people are even interested in this kind of thing. A lot of things are breaking in the news now about, people using things incorrectly and getting their departments in trouble or putting vulnerabilities in place that could impact the operational capability of the particular organization. So there's a lot of those things. So BYOD, there's a place for it in DOD. We're just still trying to figure out where that little niche is, okay? Like I said, there's a lot of people in DOD, a lot of employees. There's probably a place for it. We're just trying to find the best way to do it and sort of easing into it. Another endeavor we have is this, within the Pentagon, believe it or not, there's not been a wireless capability. It's like a fortress, right? So you go in and everything's turned off, okay? You can't do anything. You have to use your equipment. You're tied to your desk, okay? So when you get up and move and go to a meeting, or you get up and move and go down a corridor, go somewhere else, or whatever you want to do, there's no way to connect. And so what the DoD CIO and some of us have been trying to do is how can we put wireless in the Pentagon so that our employees can basically walk through the Pentagon and hold a phone call on their BlackBerry, if that's what they're using, and then that would be wonderful if we could do something like that, right? And so our Pentagon wireless plan is that if we can set it up and figure out how to do it well for the Pentagon, it can be an exemplar for other large buildings in DOD where they could make a case for doing this. So we work out all the technical details, we work out all the policy, get all the policy approvals or the certifications, and then we show other people, well, this is how you can do it so that you can have this set up in your location. This is not rocket science here. This is really not hard at all. We have contractors out there that do this for us. They're really good at it. They look at us and think we're weird because we're so far behind the times in terms of adopting things. But so we're doing that, and that was one of the things that the boss brought up back in July when he was here. We were kicking that off, and now we've made a lot of progress. We've got a lot of, the whole E-ring basically wired with it in the Pentagon. That's all 5 floors, and so it's not turned on yet for use, but it's getting to the point where we can see that this is going to have a significant benefit for people. And then at some point, when guests come into the Pentagon, we'll have the guest network set up, so when you're visiting and you want to come into one of our rooms and on your computer, your laptop, or your iPad, you want to show us something, you don't have to bring a satchel full of, PowerPoint charts. You just bring it up on your computer and show it to us. And so we're trying to create it so that when you come in as a guest, you can come in as, you can be, more technically capable. So we hope all this can get done in the next year or so, and we'll have a pretty good experience for everybody. So this is the last briefing of the day, and I'm not sure what time it is, but I try to hit the high points and basically give you an update on what we're doing in DoD CIO and how we are definitely committed to wireless. We're committed to mobility. We still have staff that work it. I still work it, and we're enthusiastic about it. We think that this is really the way to go, and the more we can advance our own capabilities is kind of where we're at, and there's some guys like me in the department who want to see us move that way, and then sometimes we've got these old Cold War documents that say you can't do anything, right? So we're trying to work through all the Cold War documents and move ourselves forward because we have the technology now where we can secure things much, much better. And so it's not like we have to be so concerned about have a wireless signal going out if we can encrypt it, and then, it's just a matter of, getting everybody accustomed to the fact and trusting it that is the big deal. I would say that in generally speaking that as we go through this mobility migration, this mobility endeavor, is that we're really not really good at the app development. I don't think we really know how to go about it. I mean, it's not that we don't have people that know how to write an app for a mobile phone or mobile device. It's just that we can't seem to come up with ways to get a whole suite of useful apps for us to use, okay? Because just for whatever reason, it's just clumsy for us, okay? We have typical programs of record that we have in the Department of Defense that were built, they're like legacy programs. We have one program that still got WMIC. WMIX was an old program that we had back in the early 80s. It was one of the first programs we had software program where we could connect and send a message to somebody. We still have some that have that same code in it, and it was ancient stuff. And we're trying to move people to something better. We're trying to go to more cloud-capable stuff, but it's hard for us. And we're trying our best to do it, trying to push that envelope and get better. So, do we have any questions?
Absolutely. This has been a very energetic and enthusiastic.
I can just see they're all
right.
jumping up and down.
And I think that they understand that you stand between the door prizes and happy hour.
Right.
So there's 25 to 30 questions here, but I think I'll start with this one here. So it's been in the news lately that the DoD is migrating, doing a global refresh for Windows 10. Do you also see the DoD embracing Windows mobile devices as well, or will we continue to maintain the diversity of devices that we have?
That's a good question, a really good question. So that's something that's coming out of our office. We're pushing Windows 10 for the department, for our computing, our operating system for our computing infrastructure, okay? And we put a short timeline on it. We want it done in a year. We've given the military departments some waiver options so that could be extended for a couple years past that. But we're trying to get everybody, because of what Windows brings to the table, Windows 10 brings to the table. We're pretty much Microsoft Office based when it comes to how we do our day-to-day business. But when it comes to mobility, nope, not touching that. So if we've got Android devices and iOS devices, we'll continue to have iOS devices and Android devices. If Windows comes out with if they try to rejuvenate their mobile device and they want to put Windows, fine, to put Windows 10 on it. But we're not going to make anybody else do anything like that. So it's largely just for our wired computing infrastructure, or wireless. If you're on a laptop, it'll have Windows 10. But if you're going to walk around on a mobile device, like a BlackBerry or whatever, no, we'll use their operating systems. Any other questions?
This one might be a little too technical, but the question is, what time does happy hour start?
I think it starts right now.
Oh, very well. I think that's all we have for questions.
All right. Thank you. All right. All right.
Sir, good to see you. Like that beard. Hey, everybody. Randy Siegel here. This concludes our day. We, wanted to thank everybody for braving the weather, Mr. Conway, all the other speakers. We also would have like a housekeeping item of the raffle, which I'm sure people want to hear. So, hey, Will Alberts, you want to come and pick the winners? Okay. Keep me honest here. All right, so the first one's going to be LG Tone Pro headset. Where'd he go? All right, Will. Pick me a winner.
I'm not supposed to look.
Yeah, just pick one.
All right, Jim Chen from NDU. You got to be here to win, like the lottery. You got to play to win.
Is Jim Chen here? All right.
You got a waiver.
Jim, so go to registration and claim your prize. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay.
How many do we have?
We have 3. So the next
3.
one's a level box wireless speaker courtesy of Samsung.
Okay. Looks like we have Noelle Richards from the NIAP. She here.
All right, Noelle. Awesome.
All right. Another one?
The last one is a level on headphone courtesy of Samsung again.
They seem to give everything away.
Yeah, it's nice of them.
All right. Brandon Sale? No. Sorry.
What's the domain?
It's who.
Oh, Whammo.
Yeah.
Whammo, anybody from White House?
Oh, all
Okay,
right. Next. So let's see. And the winner is David Yassler.
Oh, we saw David before from DISA. He's still here. David.
Going once, going twice.
Okay.
And we have the last one in the box. Someone's got to win. Henry Jones. Bingo.
All right, Henry. So you could pick that up front. Will, thank you. Just a couple of words outside before happy hour. Really want to thank the sponsors, Samsung, AirWatch, HP, Red Hat, Citrix, FireEye, Perion, Verizon, AT&T, IBM, Booz Allen, Hamilton, Lookout, Atlantic Data Security, Northrop Grumman, LG, Interseed, Hypori, Now Secure. And then also, perhaps most importantly, as the vice chair of the mobile working group, I wanted to say, my special thank you, as this is the sort of the culmination of, a lot of hard work. We meet on a monthly basis. I'd love for more folks to participate. I mean, we've got a really good, solid group. And I just want to call out, certain people who this time I think really stepped up. So it was great to see Nick Nyland of Verizon working hand in hand with Andrew Osborne and Martin Joseph of AT&T and Allison Reardon of AT&T. That was dynamite, that type of connection. Stuart Lyles and Jeff Tannenbaum of IBM. Jamie Wu of Samsung is always a terrific contributor. And then, of course, our friends from the government, Will Alberts, Greg Yost is always, there and has been a, staunch advocate from the beginning. Greg, thank you for your continued, dialogue. And then finally, last but not least, none of this could be done without the chair of the group, Randy Clark. I have huge respect for Mr. Clark, not only for his military service with the Marines. Randy, I think, is a hugely competent person with lots of great ideas, and he was basically, I think, almost single-handedly responsible for shaping a lot of the ideas and going out and getting the people to get here. So kudos to Randy Clark. And for those of you who would love to or would like to participate in the mobile working group going forward, please talk to myself, to Clark, to anyone else. We would love to have folks, the more the merrier. And I think that just about closes the event for today. So thanks for being here. Thanks for bearing the snow, and get home safely. Thanks, everybody. Oh yeah, Samsung Party Hour, right? So thanks again, Samsung.